Hi, welcome to the Question of Character podcast. I'm Bill Furlong, founder and co-host, and this is a podcast, as regular listeners and viewers would know, where we answer all of your questions around leader character, and in particular the Ivy Leader Character Framework. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that comes up all the time, and that's the topic of culture, and how can we embed leadership character into our organization's culture. And we have an absolutely wonderful guest on this topic. But first, let me introduce my co-host and colleague, Dr. Mary Crossan. As you know, Mary is a distinguished university professor at Western, and her very impressive bio can be found in links to this episode on the Question of Character website or at the Ivy Business School website as well. So Mary, it's so nice to see you again.
Great to be here, Bill.
So I'd like to welcome today's special guest. She is a federal public servant who has served in many Canadian federal departments and agencies, including the Department of Canadian Heritage, the Minister of State for Multiculturalism and the Status of Women, the Department of Public Safety, Canada Revenue Agency, and the Canada Border Services Agency. During her public service career, she has had many titles and roles, including Director of Strategic Policy and Research, Director for Cabinet Affairs, and the Chief of Staff for a Deputy Minister. She is currently the Director General, Culture at the Canada Border Services Agency. She is Jennifer Bitz. Hi, Jen. How are you?
Hi, Bill. I'm doing well, thanks.
So, Jen, it's lovely to see you today, and thanks for joining us. Is there anything in your intro that I might have missed that you'd like to share?
I'll just add, Bill, that I am a proud Canadian public servant and that I really take seriously the impact that our Canadian institutions have on society.
Thank you, Jen, for sharing that. That so rings true as we know you so well. So again, thanks for joining us today to talk about this really important conversation around culture and character. There's a famous quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and I think people often attribute that to the famous management guru, Peter Drucker. Many organizations talk like they have a great culture, but then of course it turns out that they don't. So one example of that is Enron. And back in 2003, Enron declared bankruptcy, and it was as a result of a number of, I think, what people had characterized as frauds or certainly misrepresentations around the account that they had put into place regarding various structured transactions. At the time, Enron's core values were respect, integrity, communication, and excellence. And clearly the aspirational culture that they wanted and the one they actually got were really two different things. So just saying that you have a great culture doesn't necessarily make it so. So we think that leader character has a very important role to play in creating and sustaining an aspirational culture. And we are fortunate and delighted to have Jenn Bitz joining us today. Jen's a true practitioner in every sense of the word. And she's led this process a number of times. When I say process, a process around incorporating character into an organizational culture, many times in various complex environments. So Jen, maybe the first question I'd ask, which is kind of like a baseline question, is how would you define culture in the context of an organization?
Well, culture is really how we do things around here. It's as simple as that. I like the analogy of the wind. Culture is like the wind in your institution. If it's a headwind, it's working against you. If it's a tailwind, it's working with you. A more theoretical definition that I like to use comes from human systems theory, and that is that culture is the combination or the collection of the patterns of behavior of the people within the system. And those patterns are shaped by many factors. I believe, based on my experience leading culture transformation, that the most important factor is the character of the leaders.
And you might also just think about the extensions into the systems and routines of the organization that reflect what the choices are that are being made, Jen, right? As you say about the leaders of the organization, like who do we select? Who do we promote? And so sometimes, Bill, the people look at the culture of an organization as more about its routines and compensation and its systems, the non-human side. And they forget that there is agency and choice about what you do with those systems and routines. So it all, as Jen says, boils down to what are the choices that senior leaders are making and the character that they have around those choices. And so we saw with Enron, you gave as an example, it was a reflection of its senior leadership.
So with that in mind, Why would you say culture is so important for an organization's success? And I think everyone takes that as a given, but I wonder if maybe you can go a level or two deeper for that to just try and explain as to what is it about culture that makes it so important?
What makes culture so important to an organization is its impact on the performance of the organization. And we can point to some research that has been extremely helpful for me that I've drawn on in my work on culture, which is by Amy Edmondson. And what she's been able to find is that the psychological safety that is present within an organization is the single best predictor of high performance of the organization. So, wow, is that ever telling? Psychological safety, which is I see as being synonymous with trust, and that is a marker of a healthy culture, is where trust is present. So that in my work on culture is that will be central to the culture that we're aspiring to, is for trust to be present, and then that has this direct impact on the performance. Another interesting bit of research comes from positive psychology, which shows that when employees are happy, they tend to be more creative. They bring more energy to the work, and it actually has, Sean Atcher has quantified it as the organization becomes 31% more productive when employees are happy. And the opposite, so if they're working in a negative, neutral, or stressed frame of mind, could create significant slowdowns to the performance of the organization, to the productivity. So then we get into, what is at stake here? What is the organization actually losing when the employees are, not feeling like they're working in that healthy environment?
So, Mary, there's two things I'd like to pick up. That's a fascinating answer, Jen. I didn't know about the idea around psychological safety. Just to sort of pick up on that a little bit, Mary, is Jen made a reference to two references. One was to trust, and I think you and I in previous conversations have talked about how trust and character are highly correlated, and in some ways might even be the same thing. And then secondly, happy. And happy is kind of an amorphous, subjective concept, but we often talk about character being associated with well-being. Would you draw lines between trust and character and happiness and well-being in the way that Jen's referring to it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Trust, and to expand on that, and I'm really familiar with Amy Edmondson's work because in my field of organizational learning, you think about like how is it we've just written a piece of linking character and the capacity for learning. So those concepts of the psychologically safe environment, if we don't, feel safe, we don't, as you used the view, trust, Jen, we don't share, right? We withhold information, we fear repercussions, we fear looking stupid, and there's a variety of things. So it's not just the underperforming that Jen talked about, it's also the fact that there's a lot of really bad things that end up happening. Almost any kind of misconduct in an organization or a bad decision, whether it's Boeing or whether it's Enron or whether it's Wells Fargo, you can tie it right back to the fact that there are people who are not speaking up or speaking out about issues. To the idea of being happy, some people will go, well, that's really tough. I mean, not every, it's hard work. Not everybody's going to be happy, but it's not. It's about people really feeling respected, feeling that they are part of the organization, feeling engaged. So there's a variety of kind of measures around that well-being side of things that invite people to bring their whole selves to work. And we know with character, we've already talked about character, equity, diversity, and inclusion, for example. It is the person allowing themselves to bring their whole self to the organization.
So now we just talked about how important culture is for performance, and And when you've got an underperforming culture, then it has dramatic effects on the performance of the organization. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about this. We know how important it is. Why is it so hard to create and sustain this idea of an aspirational or desired culture? Why isn't it just enough to say, okay, everyone, this is what our culture is. Let's just do that. And what is it that leaders, and there's a lot of questions, Jen, so, what do leaders get wrong and what do followers not get right? So there's a lot there, but I wonder if you can sort of maybe help us with that question or those series of questions.
I will do my best. When you mentioned those, the 4 values of Enron, it made me think about, right, they're just words. Have we actually communicated in a meaningful way to our employees? What do those mean? I was actually just driving home from work the other day, and I saw at a construction site they had on the fence they had what would be their organization's values, and yet I thought, does the average worker actually know what they mean? Respect is a fantastic one. Respect for what? Often we miss that piece, and it leaves employees wondering, yeah, what do you really need from me? And that's where character comes in, because it provides that clarity of how I expect to be treated, how I promise to be treated, how I will show up for you, and what I can count on you for. So why is that so hard? To go back to your first question, Bill. What I've observed over the years is that it's that we expect the work of culture transformation to proceed in the same way that other processes proceed within our institutions. Meaning that we treat it as a finite game, and culture transformation is an infinite game. Any investment in culture needs to be seen as an infinite process. Not that you won't see successes along the way and have big gains, big steps forward, and we could talk more about what those look like and how they feel, but it's that you can never say, we're done. Victory, raise the flag, tools down. We're not in it for that. We're not in it to win the game or potentially lose the game. We're in it to stay in the game. And that is incredibly challenging in institutions where everything is set up to be finite. Everything is, we have established systems and processes and monitoring systems in order to play that finite game extremely well, to have Gantt charts and checks and balances, milestones, check, check, check. And then we lose interest, we lose patience. And human behavior is messy, it takes time. So when things don't quite go according to how we wanted them to, this is maybe from a leader's perspective who says, I thought this was going to burn like a project. I put $1 million into this. Why isn't it this burning like a project? Or in the government context, why hasn't this life cycle gone like a memorandum to cabinet that then and then we go to Treasury Board and we secure the funding and then we undertake the project? It doesn't work like that with human behavior. So it takes an entirely different approach and mindset and set of skills and theories and tools, and it takes your own character too, right? So that's why it's challenging.
And I would add on that, Jen, as you say, it takes your own character too. How often people look to everything else to change but themselves, right. And it's back to this idea that people say, well, we're just not compensating people. Well, let's just change the compensation system, or we're not rewarding people. And they try to change the systems and the routines and practices without looking at themselves. That's a huge, huge danger. So it's like a drop in the bucket. You change those compensation systems, they don't, they hardly touch the problem if you haven't touched yourself. The second piece about that then is how often in articulating these aspirational cultures, we've overweighted some dimensions of character and underweighted others. You know, what organization doesn't want to be results oriented? What organization doesn't want to have integrity? You know, and of course, results oriented is part of drive. And what happens when you overweight drive and integrity without the support of humility, humanity, temperance, and who values those? And so then we get this virtues and vice problem. So we get exactly what we were looking for. You know, this relentless pursuit of trying to get results, but without understanding the strength of character, competence, and commitment of the individuals that then foster, as you said, the culture of the organization, right, to get there.
So, what is the role of leader character in defining, shaping, and sustaining a desired culture for an organization? How would you? And I know you've gone through it a couple of times. You may want to share some of those stories, but you know that's a fairly big question. But I wonder if you can just talk about how you think about character and culture, you know, being together.
What I would start with is that as you were saying, I have seen the character model. So thinking about the wheel specifically, as again, just providing that clarity to the organization as to who we are, who we aspire to be while we're busy doing, and that really it's a way of connecting the job, the mandate, to the human side. And with judgment being at the center, that's extremely helpful. And of course, that's no accident, but because that's kind of our gateway, right? We see that, judgment is what we use to make decisions about the business of this organization. And what is informing our judgment? Well, it's all of these other dimensions. And so how do I know what dimension I need when? Well, judgment is your air traffic controller. And I think what I've seen is that when leaders start to understand the wheel, start to dig into it, they recognize that, we overweight some of these dimensions when we're making our decisions, and we underweight some of the others. And then they see, and if that's the pattern at an individual level or at this committee level, not surprising that it's the pattern at an organizational level as well. For example, an issue I often find is in organizations is this pattern of getting the job done at all costs. And you can look at the wheel and see how an overweighting of certain dimensions there are human costs to that. And yet if we activate more of the humanity and the humility and the justice, then we're able to recognize that those are costs that are not worth incurring to our organization nor to the individuals. I love Mary's one of your many famous quotes, Mary, about an organization should do no harm to its employees. And that's a bit of a guiding light for me that connects the work between, or that connects the business of the organization to its character.
Yeah, the interesting piece, Jen, about as you're looking at culture and character as the way you really articulated culture, how we do things around here. So it's like we get the job done at all costs, or it doesn't matter who we step on, to get there, whatever it happens to be, is the way. And I know that we'll get there when we think a little bit about how you've approached culture. You can get at culture from how people experience the world that they're in, right? It's what's the language that they use to describe their felt experience, right, about culture. And then as you're starting to, pave the way here, as we look back, how much of that is going to be anchored in character. So if we lack transparency, if we are lacking accountability, right? If we're lacking on humility, humanity, etc., we know those are going to be direct lines on how it's going to be hitting that felt experience right around the culture.
Following that, then, Jen, you've been working with culture for a long time, and you've seen lots of different frameworks and models, and had lots of experiences. What is it about the leader character framework that brings something unique and different to resolving the problems of culture and creating an aspirational culture that you find in particular valuable?
It's complete. That's the best way that I could describe it. No matter how I shake it and turn it and squeeze it and push it and stretch it, it's all there. And I've studied many other models of leadership and seen them play out in organizations. And they do, when you poke them, sometimes a little, sometimes it takes a lot, you see where they start to fall down. So as I started learning about the leader character model, that it was as though everything else I had learned could fit into it somewhere. So, you see, for example, servant leadership, a wonderful, beautiful model of leadership. Not complete, though, because it actually overweights certain dimensions that if you introduce that entirely in an organization, you will start to see impacts on the culture that will not be favorable. That would be my theory, at least. And yeah, I could go on, but that's how I would describe it.
I love that answer. And the reason that I love the answer is because it comes from someone who's worked with lots of different theories. And I think you can look at a theory sometimes and think, oh, that makes a lot of sense intellectually, and it seems to be complete and robust. And then someone like you, Jen, works with it, and you find and discover its limitations. Right. Yet you've had the experience of working now in multiple instances, and you've yet to find it wanting, which then leads to my next question: is can you describe the process of change, culture change, where leader character plays this important role? And I know you've had a number of different examples. So one example you could share with our listeners and our viewers about an instance where you did that and how the organization responded to that.
In terms of how I've approached culture change in the organizations in which I've worked, is that I have I have definitely improved on this model with practice. So I can't say that the first time I did it, it was as kind of clear as I'll describe it. But define the existing culture, define the culture we aspire to, and then take action to get there. So fairly simple. The grassroots involvement of employees in that process has proven to be absolutely critical. And of course, the involvement of leaders and their role in setting the tone at the top and setting the example is also critical. So those are the two components that I have learned are essential. How has character contributed to that? In so many ways, but I'll start with that first step of diagnosing the existing culture. Character is a wonderful lens to use to do that. So we look for, within the existing culture, how are those players within the system, the people within the organization, who are they as they are busy doing all of these things? So we've used, for example, the aggregate results of the Leader Character Insights Assessment. That's really helpful to see what are the strengths of character, and then also the weaknesses. And so that has looking for the patterns of behavior, right? That's how I define the culture. So what are those patterns of behavior, and how is the character actually influencing those patterns? So that would be the first step, that diagnostic phase. A really important aspect of that is looking for root cause and not staying at the symptom level. So that's a process where we use, again, comes from human system theory, where we want to understand we essentially ask why multiple times in order to understand what's actually happening below the surface level.
So that's, you're using the leader character framework as a lens to describe all of that in a way which you feel comfortable is complete. And so that's your starting point. And then I guess the aspirational culture, where you want to go, also can be used in the way of can also be used looking through the lens of character as well. Is that right?
Exactly, yes. So what I'm looking for is that one of the characteristics of the culture that we aspire to would be that character is present, that strength of character is present, that our leaders are leading by example, that they are investing in not only in their continued leader development, but in that of the leaders who work for them as well, and beyond to the employees. So we're looking for that recognition again of that who we are is matters just as much as what we do, and affects the quality of our decisions. So I define that ultimate kind of desired culture with different words depending on the organization, so that it is anchored within that organization's reality and mandate. But you will see character, the word character, and the dimensions of character all through the outcomes that we're aiming to achieve. And again, in a way that reflects that unique mandate of the organization.
You know, Bill, in the field of strategy, just back to what Jenn is talking about, depending on the organization, you know, the language you use, I would say that the tweaking of what you need to do around culture is only about like 5%. Maybe it's a safety culture, it's a service culture, it's depending upon what business that you're in. But then 95% of what every organization is looking for is actually a character-based culture. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're missing. And not understanding, well, what is character? How does it operate? Overweighting some dimensions, underweighting others. As Jenn says, not having senior leaders develop their own character, not embodying it in the practices of the organization. And so this ability to kind of weave then the work of character as probably the very root cause of virtually anything that you're going to deal with in the organization, if you keep drilling it down. And it's not that people intend to do harm. Back to do nor harm, Jenn. There's very few people that intend to do harm. They don't intend to do harm, but that doesn't get them off the hook of, you know, being abrasive and difficult and dogmatic and dismissive and et cetera, right? That can get to the problems that we have in culture that are so prevalent in many organizations.
So that then becomes the piece that people tend to miss when they think about culture transformation. Is that what you talked about, Mary, that 95%, you know, common denominator that we all need, and people tend to focus elsewhere. And I guess the question is how come people don't really see that, Jenn? I mean, it seems like as we're talking here, it seems kind of like that makes a lot of sense. Yet it's not really, I wouldn't characterize it as conventional wisdom. I mean, any thoughts on as to what people are missing or why boards and CEOs and others don't see that as clearly perhaps as we might?
Yeah, good question, Bill. I think I would relate it back to something Mary referred to earlier on, which is the idea of bringing the whole person to work. And the reason I connect the two is that I am, first of all, a huge believer in that. In fact, when I learned that from Mary, it was a real game changer for me in my career. And what I have observed is that I think we have taught at least what I see within the institutions I've worked in, we have taught and set the example that the whole person is not welcome in the organization, that there is a certain professional persona that is required that shuts down certain aspects of ourselves. And the parts that we shut down tend to be I would relate to the heart, to the will, to instinct, to gut, to the things that happen a little further down than up here in our what we associate with being our intellect. And so we prioritize that intellect. We hire for that. We promote for that. This kind of competence that we see as being what is only needed or largely needed, and tend to dismiss those other parts that are actually just as important. And so the reason how I would relate that to your question is that it's when we're considering a strategy for our organization, it's so easy to just leave out those human aspects and focus on what feels much more tangible and concrete and practical, that are those things that perhaps we can just tackle intellectually. But it's uncomfortable when we think about, the rest of ourselves. And but the more we do that, like I find when I'm speaking, for example, at a senior executive committee, when I start talking about feelings or needs, human needs, you get the shuffling in the seats and it's uncomfortable. It's not familiar. And yet, oh my gosh, what it opens up once we really get into it, once we start to, to create that habit of it being okay to speak about how we're feeling today or how we feel about an issue, but what our instinct is telling us, that kind of thing, then we're bringing in more of the whole person. And that's when you start to see how, how it actually can be successful, this whole theory on culture change.
Bill, the missing, insight about the connection between character and culture is the very same problem of not seeing the connection between character and competence. It's, that old, analogy about when people were trying to fly and they were emulating birds flapping their wings and it was all the mechanical, like, what can you see? A lot of the way we've treated organizations is a bit like that. And character is like the aerodynamics, right? Like, what didn't we see? And it's a game changer. Like once you've got that, and as Jenn picks up though, it's a new way of thinking that requires a different skill set. And for people that they can't step away from it and go, but it's not, I don't like that. It does not matter whether you like it or not. It affects judgment. All of these dimensions of character, all of these behaviors affect judgment. Physiology, affect, behavior, cognition, all of them. It's not just cognitive, the affect piece is there. So the science behind it is undeniable, like the aerodynamics, right, in flight.
I also love Jen's answer too, Mary, that it ties back to the whole idea of psychological safety. So if you don't feel like you can bring your whole self to work, why would you feel safe psychologically in that workplace like that? And I think character gives us the tools to not only to create workplaces like that, so barrel makers, but it also, I think, creates the character that we need to actually, be vulnerable enough to work inside of those spaces as well. So that was an inspired answer, Jenn. Thank you for that. So Jenn, that brings us then to our last question, which is, what advice would you give a leader like yourself, an HR leader or a CEO or a board member or a board chair, And someone who's just listened to our conversation today, maybe this is the first they've heard about leadership character or how character and culture sort of connect together. What advice would you give them? What's the next thing they need to do?
The advice I would give them is twofold. One is to start with yourself, and two is to be patient. I would link back to the difference between an infinite game and a finite game. Remember that you are playing an infinite game. When you remember you're playing an infinite game, there's also an element of trusting the process that comes with that that is so necessary, because it really does not, it won't progress in an entirely perfectly predictable, clean manner. And if we allow the system to breathe, the process to breathe, people to take the time that they need to build that self-awareness, to have their own aha moments. Especially the senior executive team in any institution is so important for the culture and for setting that tone. And so as they're developing their character, they will have harder times, face challenges of that's a sticky one for me. And there needs to be that that ability to almost that grace and a vulnerability that we need to afford ourselves and each other, and know that we will get there. We just need to stick with it in a way that is different from how the rest of the work of the organization tends to proceed.
And that seems to me to require a certain degree of socialization. In other words, you've got to socialize the idea that, and get people used to the idea that this is a journey. It's not a start-stop Gantt chart. But as you said before, it's going to, your strength of character, by starting with yourself, you will need all elements and strengths in all dimensions to be able to sort of see this journey through. In particular, it sounds like the dimension of temperance, which frequently for people that are very achievement oriented and getting things done there's a bit of a paradigm shift in thinking about, well, this is how character gets done, and it's done in a different way. And once that paradigm shift people make that change, it becomes something which is easier to socialize, and people can start to then invest in their character in a way that they need to culturally transform the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Temperance is one that really comes to mind what I said, be patient, right? I would say that it's enough though to start from a place of self-awareness. So, in whatever shape that takes for you. So whether it's the leader character insights assessment or, other ways of relying on people you trust to help you to understand yourself and, and how you show up, and how you're perceived in the world. And then to jump in and work at it. You don't need to be perfect, right? Like I certainly wasn't when I first started on this work, and I definitely am not now. But it's the journey, and so it's that remaining committed to the journey, which also goes back to commitment to leadership in the first place. I've made a choice here to be a leader. I aspire to lead. I know it takes sacrifice, but I'm engaged. I'll keep at it.
And Bill, that temperance that Jen's talking about, if you think about culture, it's very much like this whole embedded, like the dolls that are nested within one another, is that there's yourself that has, a big influence, but you're in the context of the work team that you're in, the geographic culture, which could be quite different than the organization culture. You can get sector cultures. You've got the culture that can also be affected by, in my case, academic academia in general, how it affects universities. You can get country culture. And so these kind of pressures of these big forces that are on organizations and hence through to the individual means that we really need to have a lot of strength of character, because most of those systems are offside of where we want them to be. Systemic racism, why is that? It's been there for a long time. Doesn't make it right. But we just understand, right? Where are those forces? Why are they there? What's going on? And how do I manage within the organizational context, organizational culture within that? And boy, Jen, I can think about nothing more important to navigate that complexity than having character as the individual to not only your own well-being, right, amidst all of that challenge, and then also to deliver, because it's complex. These systems are very complex systems that we're operating in.
That makes me think, Mary, about just the idea that we want the conditions within our organizations to compel our leaders to be at their best, right? So that it helps them to be, like you talk about, to rising above the fray, to seek higher ground, which certainly doesn't mean stepping aside. Often it means actually stepping in. And so that I find that really inspiring, that this work on culture is creating conditions for the people within the system to really be at their best.
That feels to me, Jen, like a great place to finish. I can't imagine how anyone could listen to this episode today and not actually want to incorporate leadership character into their cultural transformation today. You're very persuasive, and it's been absolutely delightful to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Bill. I'm delighted to have been able to be a part of it.
Thanks again to Jen for a wonderful conversation today around culture and character. If you've liked what you've heard today, please share with your friends and your colleagues. If you really like what you've heard today, feel free to subscribe to our podcast, Question of Character. We also have a website called questionofcharacter.com, where we will be posting various resources and articles, and in particular, links to some of the articles that I think that both Jenn and Mary were referring to in today's podcast. It's also a place where you can send us any of your comments, your thoughts on what you've heard today, and any suggestions that you might have for future podcasts. We'll also post links to the Ian O. Ina Towitz Institute for Leadership at Ivy Business School, where there's even more resources, articles, and information about the leader character framework. So I think it's time for us to wrap up for today. Jen, thank you again so much for joining us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Bill.
And Mary, I'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bill. Till next time.